Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Stephen Shalowitz, first reminding you that for 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, visit jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org. Hope you got that. All right, as for this episode, did you hear the news? Israel's baseball team is going to the Tokyo Olympics. And here to share all the buzz and to talk baseball in Israel, our featured guest is none other than Peter Kurz, general manager of the Israel national baseball team. Now, for more than 20 years, Peter has been volunteering to develop baseball in Israel. He served as president of the Israel Association of Baseball for 6 years and for 8 as its secretary general. Peter's managed 10 Israeli national teams, has worked as a coach and manager, and has run both elite baseball academies and little leagues too. And if you saw the documentary Heading Home, The Tale of Team Israel, you'll know that Peter assembled the first ever Israeli team to compete in the 2017 World Baseball Classic. And now he's realizing his dream and leading Team Israel to the Olympics. And with that, it's an absolute honor to welcome Peter Kurz to IsraelCast, who joins us now on the line via Zoom from his home in Tel Aviv. Hello, Peter, and welcome to the program.
Hello, Steve. Thank you very much. That was quite an introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, you're quite a guy who deserves an intro like that. So listen, first, congratulations to you and on your teammates for all the many successes. And I want to talk about the Tokyo Olympics in a moment, as well as I want to highlight the work Jewish National Fund is doing to foster baseball in Israel. But as I always believe, and as I always like to do, I always like to start in the past, because after all, the past is prologue. So let's take a really big step back, Peter, and have you talk about the connection between baseball and Israel, because you don't necessarily think of the two going, pun intended, hand in glove. So how did it really all come about?
Well, if you want to talk about the beginning, then you have to go way, way back. Because it says in the Bible, in the first sentence of the Bible is in the beginning, which is in the big inning. So that's where baseball really started. But baseball in Israel started about 40 years ago. Olim Chadashim, new immigrants who came over from America, they started the program. They started baseball. They started developing baseball. They did the they created the IAB. Today it's about 1,000 kids playing baseball in Israel. Kids and adults playing baseball in Israel, all over the country, from Beersheba in the south to Misgav in the north. Primarily the center part of the country, Beit Shemesh, Ra'anana, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Modi'in. Those are our main areas. And together with the JNF USA, we've been developing fields. And today we're building 2 new fields in Israel. Bulldozers are actually on the ground building those fields, one in Beit Shemesh and one in Ra'anana, which is going to triple the number of fields we have in Israel, because right now we have 1 field in Israel. And it'll give us a really, as they say, if you build it, they will come. And that's totally true. And we're hoping that with these 2 new fields, along with our appearance in the Olympics, we'll double and triple the number of kids in our organization in the next couple of years.
Well, it's fantastic. And I know JNF also has a role in terms of helping the baseball team to go to the Olympics as well. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But I do want to just stay on baseball in Israel right now and where it stands. And I understand that in 2014, the IAB launched the Israel Baseball Academy. And I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about that.
Sure. We actually in 2013, a gentleman named Nate Fish came to Israel to live there for a few years to run our organization as the operating manager. He was there. He ran the organization. He started the academy. The academy today has been made up of about 20, 25 kids between the ages of about 15 to 18, because at the age of 18, everybody has to go into the army in Israel. So that's our main age group, those 3 years. They come, they're in their own leagues, their own city leagues, but they all come together twice a week in the Baptist Village, which is where our main field is, in Petach Tikva. And they come there for extra practice with the best coaches in Israel. There's visiting coaches we bring in all the time. They're in contact with all our professional players who are scattered all over the United States. Meet with them, meet with Eric Holtz, who's the manager of the Olympic team, and he's sort of the manager overseeing all the professional part of the organization. But those are our elite of Israel baseball, those 25 kids.
Right. And I know the IAB also runs the Le Coulam program, and it's a beautiful program. And I want you to share that with our listeners that might not be familiar with it.
Baseball Ikulam is our attempt to bring coexistence between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs. We have a couple of programs going on now, a couple in the north of Israel and also in the south of Israel, where there are larger Arab populations. We go out there, we teach the kids baseball. They've started up in the north, they've already started playing within our leagues, which is great. And they're just playing baseball and loving baseball. In the beginning, we had it in the Baptist village. We had kids staying overnight. We had both Arabs and Jewish kids coming and staying overnight and learning baseball. And that was fantastic, just being together and everything. Seeing for the first time through baseball that everybody's equal. I mean, everybody's the same in Israel. Doesn't matter if you're Jewish or Arab, you're all Israelis, and they're all playing together. We're hoping to develop the first Arab kids who can really be at a higher level, play on our national teams. It's not there yet, but it'll get there. And we're looking forward to that.
Right. Well, listen, let's switch gears just for a sec right now and talk about that World Baseball Classic. It was just in 2017, so just a couple of years ago. And if people haven't seen the documentary Heading Home, The Tale of Team Israel already, you can get it on Amazon very easily. I urge everybody to see it. I saw it, as I told you before we started rolling here, Peter, I saw it in preparation for our conversation. And I can't tell you how moved I was by it. And I'll share why in just a sec. But we have a very global audience, and some may not be familiar with the story about putting together that team and how they really exceeded everyone's expectations. And they finished 6th out of a field of 16 teams. So well done for the team. So can you briefly take our listeners through that whole entire journey and how they made it to the WBC in 2017, first in Seoul, and then they moved on to Tokyo?
I have to go back a little bit further than that because I have to go back to probably about 2007. In 2007, there was the first professional baseball league in Israel. In 2006, I met a guy in New York. He's from Boston, and he told me he has a dream to bring baseball to Israel, to bring professional baseball to Israel. He told me his dream. I said, "You're crazy." A year later, together with the help of the JNF, he brought 120 players to Israel. There were 6 teams. Guys like Art Shamsky were coaches. Holtzman was a coach. They were there. They had the league. It was going on for the whole summer. It was a fantastic thing. There were 3,000 people at the first game. Unfortunately, the second game, there were 3 people. And that's the way it continued throughout the summer. The guy went bankrupt after that season, but it put Israel baseball on the map. And MLB got hold of us and heard about what was going on. And that's why in 2012 or 2011, they invited us to come to the first qualifiers of the WBC. And I had no idea what to do, but somehow we got a meeting with 3 guys who had just recently retired from baseball, Brad Ausmus, Gabe Kapler, and Sean Green. And because of the unique heritage rule of that tournament, where a person can play for a team if he's able to get citizenship in that country. He doesn't necessarily have to hold citizenship, but he has to be able to get citizenship. So because of the law of return of Israel, basically anybody who has a Jewish grandparent can get citizenship in Israel. It's not the same as the halakha, as the Jewish law, where you have to have a mother. In Israel, the law of Israel is that anybody who has a Jewish grandparent can become an Israeli citizen. So almost any Jewish ball player in the States could become citizens of Israel. So they were eligible to play for Team Israel. We put a team together in 2012 for the qualifiers. Unfortunately, we lost to Spain in the qualifiers. Fast forward to 4 years, 2016. The qualifiers are in Brooklyn. They invite Team Israel to come again. We're able to get guys like Ike Davis, like Jason Marquis to play for us, Ryan Lavarnway. We win the qualifiers in Brooklyn. We were certainly the home team there. All of our games, we had all the Jewish people coming out to the games. They were all in Coney Island, in the stadium in Coney Island, where, by the way, we will be playing an exhibition game again on the July 11th. We'll have an exhibition game there, but that's just a plug that I stuck in there. So we went to the main tournament. We were the last team to join the main tournament, to join the 16 teams going to Korea. Nobody gave us a shot. ESPN called us the Jamaican bobsled team, making fun of us. We brought 10 guys to Israel in January of that year. That's what's documented in the movie Heading Home. We brought those guys to Israel to see the country, to feel the country, to gain the experience of being here. They related that to the players a month later when they went to Korea with them. It was a really great group of guys. They just pulled together so much, came together so much. And in Korea, we proceeded to defeat Korea. They were very, very nervous. We defeated them in 10 innings, 2-1. 12 hours later, we had to play Taiwan, and we defeated Taiwan. So after 2 games, and Korea started before the other divisions did. okay, because they started 2 days before the States. So after 2 days, after 12 hours, Israel was 2-0. Nobody else had practically played. Korea was 0-1 and Taiwan was 0-1, and everybody was just playing. And all of a sudden, people woke up in the morning and said, "My God, what is it? How is Israel 2-0?" And the third game, we defeated the Netherlands. We then moved up to the Japanese pool, and the first game there, we beat Cuba. I mean, to beat the Cuban national team is incredible. It doesn't matter what team it is. It wasn't a very strong team, but still to go out on that field and beat the Cuban national team was incredible. A lot of experiences, a lot of great stories from there, which is shown in the movie. Unfortunately, after that, we landed down on Earth. We lost the next two games. We ended up, as you say, in sixth place. So that was our story of the WBC, our tale of the WBC.
It's still a remarkable story, and really congrats to you and to everybody involved and the players as well. And the reason why the documentary touched me so much, especially in the times that we're living in right now with so much anti-Semitism, is that for me, it really showed this sense of Jewish pride more than anything else, just hands down. And you saw that Jewish pride come from people that maybe weren't raised Jewish or were half Jewish, or not practicing, or had a bar mitzvah, but then called it a day after that. But they all had such a wonderful sense of Jewish pride and a wonderful sense of a Jewish spirit. And there were so many wonderful nuggets and quotes in that documentary, one of which was, "It's not about our careers, it's about something bigger." And Josh Zeid, for example, said, "Baseball kind of took me away, and now it's bringing me back."
Right.
And I thought that was just so incredibly powerful. And even you had Ike Davis talking about how and I took down the quote, "One thing you think about when playing for Israel, a lot of people don't like Jewish people."
Right. There's a great story about Josh Zeid. In 2012, in the qualifiers in 2012, Josh Zeid was on the mound. He was the losing pitcher in our final game to Spain. 4 years later, Jerry Weinstein, when he brought the guys together before we played in the qualifiers in Brooklyn, he had us all the first day come into the dugout. All the guys talked about what their backgrounds were. He went to different guys. Everybody spoke about where they played and everything. Josh Zeid said, "I've been playing baseball for the last 4 years with one mission in mind. I wanted to retire, but I said, no, I've got to come back and play for Team Israel again because I want to show that I'm proud to be a Jew and that the loss in 2012 was not what I am today. And I wanted to play for Team Israel and come back and play for Team Israel." And on the mound in 2016, he was the winning pitcher. And he's going to be playing for us again in 2021 after not pitching for 3 years in the majors. He's making a comeback. He's working for a major league team for the Cubs in Arizona. He's pitching really well. We saw him a few weeks ago in Arizona. We weren't sure if he was going to be able to come back, but he's pitching well. And I can see him be a very, very big part of this team on the mound in Tokyo.
Listen, I'm behind all the players, but I'm especially behind him because I'm a Chicago boy, third generation Chicagoan. So the Cubs are my team. So I'm a big Josh Zeid fan. And if I'm not mistaken, he always wore a Star of David, didn't he, around his neck?
Yes. No, he's, again, not all the players had two Jewish parents or a Jewish upbringing. He had two Jewish parents. He had a very Jewish upbringing, but it doesn't matter. I mean, a guy like Blake Galen, and maybe I can go a little bit now into the Olympic team.
Sure. I'd like to talk about the Olympics right now.
Okay.
And if you don't mind, though, before we talk about the team, because we did touch on Jewish National Fund a moment ago, I know that there are challenges in putting a team together. And I know JNF really stepped up to the plate, really, again, no pun intended. I would have used that phrase anyway, but really stepped up to help. Because again, as I understand it, this is the first time that Israel has its first appearance at the Olympics in a team sport since Montreal in 1976. That's when a soccer team went. So this is a team sport. That means you have a lot of people that are going. You have coaches. You have, of course, the whole team. You have a whole entourage, if you will, going, and that all costs money. And JNF really helped out with that.
I tell you, in 2018, I met with the Israeli Olympic Committee and I said to them, listen, in 2019, next year, we have to go through all these qualifying tournaments and maybe we'll qualify for the Olympics. And they were like, yeah. You know, this guy has dreams. He's talking, whatever. In 2019, after we qualified, 2 weeks later, I came back to Israel right afterwards. 2 weeks later, I met with the IOC. First of all, congratulations. It's fantastic. There were 50 athletes at that time who had qualified for the Olympics. And I came with 24 more athletes. So I actually increased their number of athletes that they had by 50%. So they were very happy, but they were very nervous. They weren't sure how to eat this. There hasn't been a team sport in Israel, a team playing in it for Israel in the Olympics in 45 years. It's always been, judo guys or sailing people or things like that. So individual sports, it's a much different way to approach it. Unfortunately, anybody who knows the Israeli government, hopefully now the new government will last longer, but no government has really lasted. So Israel today is working on the budget of 2018, and we qualified in 2019. So there was no fund. There were no funds there in the government. Somehow they've been able to scrounge around a little bit for some more funds, but the bulk of our funding is going with the JNF, having Zoom calls, having parlor meetings, and just working, from word to mouth and getting funding through the JNF.
I think it's fantastic, really. So congratulations to everybody indeed involved. And so how many teams, Peter, are playing baseball in the Olympics?
It's a total of 6 teams.
Okay.
5 have qualified so far. 1 qualifying tournament will be next week. The final qualifying tournament will be next week. So there's Japan as the home team. We were the first team to qualify as the European African representative. Mexico and Korea qualified from the Premier 12 tournament in 2019. And the US just qualified 2 weeks ago in the Americas tournament. The final tournament is 3 teams. It's the Netherlands, Venezuela, and the Dominican Republic. So one of those 3 teams will be the 6th team. And we will be playing the United States. It's not the opening game of the tournament, but it's the second game of the tournament. It's the first game for us against the United States on July 29th at 6 a.m. Eastern time in the US. And July 30th at 6 a.m. Eastern time, we'll be playing Korea.
We're all going to be watching, Peter. We're going to be rooting you all on from this end. And how are you preparing? How are the guys training?
Let me just step back a little bit and tell you how I put the team together.
Sure.
Because after the WBC in 2017, the WBSC, which is the World Baseball Federation, the World Baseball Softball Federation, announced that baseball was coming back to the Olympics. And they announced what the qualifying situation would be. Israel had to qualify in Europe because we're playing baseball in Europe, but we were in the B pool. We weren't even in the A pool. So we had to win the A pool. We had to win the A pool playoff. We had to win the B pool. We had to win the B pool playoff. We had to go up to the A pool, and then we had to go to the qualifiers. So 4 tournaments in a matter of about 10 weeks in the summer of 2019 in 4 different countries in Europe. I met with a manager in 2018, and I said to him, "Listen, this is the path that we have to take, and we can do it." And I said to him, "We can do it. We can get to the Olympics." He said, "You're crazy." And I said to him, "Okay, but let's try to do it." So the first thing was I went to a lot of the players in the WBC team, and I asked them if they wanted to make Aliyah, to become Israeli citizens. For the Olympics, you have to have Israeli citizenship. You have to be a passport-holding player, not like the WBC. I told the guys, "Listen, it's a difficult process. You've got to talk to a rabbi. You've got to get paperwork. You've got to have an FBI record. The FBI has to check you out. In America, they have to send a report to Israel. You have to come to Israel. You have to be there for a bit. You have to get an interview." Nobody said no. Right away, they all said yes. In 2018, I brought 10 guys on Aliyah. In 2019, I brought 4 more guys on Aliyah. And in 2019, at the end of 2019, I brought 4 more guys on Aliyah. So 18 Jewish American players have taken on Israeli citizenship. They've all been to Israel at least twice. It was unfortunately because of the corona, we weren't able to bring them for the last year and a half. But they've all come. They've been out all over the country teaching baseball, doing clinics. Kids are in contact with them in the States. They know what's going on. They can say the statistics right away of all the players that are playing either minor league baseball or independent league baseball. Our kids come to the States. They go to games. They're invited to games. They're there. There's definitely cooperation between our Israelis who live in Israel and our Israelis who live in the United States. And they want to come to Israel as much as they can to help develop baseball. Ian Kinsler was our last pickup. Ian Kinsler was a 14-year MLB player, 4-year All-Star. He had just retired. I asked him if he wanted to come to Israel. He said, "Yes, I'm coming." He made Aliyah just before the corona came into effect, and you had to be in 2-week quarantine to come to Israel. He missed that by 4 hours. He came 4 hours later. So he was here for 3 days. He got his citizenship. He was all over the country. He barely got on his flight back. We had to drag him off the field to get him back there, but he wants to come back again. He wants to be here a lot, and he's going to help us go to the Olympics. So in 2019, we went to these tournaments from Blagoevgrad, Bulgaria, through to Germany, which was difficult in itself to be a national team playing in Germany. Talking about Judaism and the effect of our history on a lot of individual players. My parents were Holocaust survivors. Some of the players' grandparents were Holocaust survivors. So that was in itself difficult. And in Italy, we won the qualifiers where we beat the top 3 teams of Europe. And we were Olympians. In the summer of 2019, we were Olympians. We thought 10 months later we would go to Tokyo. It's been a year and 10 months. But now, hopefully in about 30 days, we'll be going to Tokyo and we'll be there.
You just highlighted some of the players, but I'm wondering if you can expand on that, Peter, and talk about some of the players that were with you in WBC and that now have stayed with you on for the Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, guys who did well in the WBC. You know, Zaid was the main guy,
Yeah.
but Blake Galen, Nick Rickles was with us in 2012. He's been with us the whole journey. Other guys just right when they started playing for Israel in 2012 or 2016, doesn't matter when. Having Israel across your chest, being on the first baseline when Hatikva is being played. You know, baseball is the only sport where you have a cap. I don't think there's any other sport that you actually play, maybe golf, but no other sports you play with a cap on. So usually when the 2 teams line up on the first base and third base lines, they have the national anthems. You take off your cap. Team Israel leaves on their caps. Okay, Team Israel leaves on their caps because not for any religious reason, because Hatikva is not a religious song or anything, but traditionally. And what we did in Brooklyn was the guys took off their caps and put on yarmulkes, kippahs. They had kippahs that they put on their head, and that drove the crowd crazy. Everybody went crazy. That was a surprise. That was a gimmick we had. We might do something similar in the Olympics. We'll see. Wait and see. It's a little bit more difficult in the Olympics to do things like that. But the guys feel pride of being Jewish, first of all, and being Israeli as well, asking a lot of questions. We have 4 native Israelis on the team who went to the army, who are Sabras. They talk about their army service. They talk about what it's like to grow up in Israel. Everybody is curious. They want to hear stories. When I was we had a camp in Arizona 2 weeks, about a month ago. It was when the missile attacks were happening in Israel. And there I was sitting in the dugout in Arizona watching this team practice on the field. And I'm looking at my cell phone at the WhatsApps in my family, and my kids and my wife are texting each other back and forth. Is everything okay? Are you in the bomb shelter? Is this okay? Is everything fine? You know, I heard a big boom, and there I am sitting there, and it was totally spacing out. And the guys came over and said, "What's wrong? Is everything okay? Is everything okay with your family?" So they're living the experience of being Israeli.
Right.
No doubt about it.
Peter, can you talk anecdotally, perhaps, what happens when some of these players make it to Israel and they embrace Israel and they have now this Israel connection?
You know, from coming to Tel Aviv, when they came to Tel Aviv, for example, we brought them in January of 2020. January 2020, we brought them to Tel Aviv before the corona. Okay, we thought we were going to the Olympics 6 months later. We brought all the guys to Tel Aviv. They went to see the president of Israel. They were honored there because I told them this is the only time they'll be together. They can come, so they agreed to have us come there. They went to the market, to the shuk in Tel Aviv, in their uniforms, and they had a photography session there. And the people loved it. They just loved being there with the people and everything. They were getting all kinds of food and everything. The people said, baseball. Nobody here in Israel, very few people here in Israel know about baseball, and they don't believe that there's a national team that's going to the Olympics for Israel. They'll know it when they see it on television, for sure. But the players got into it. Obviously the nightlife in Tel Aviv is amazing. So they were happy to go out to the bars and everything in Tel Aviv, but also on the baseball fields, being with the kids, being with these academy kids, teaching the academy kids, seeing these kids grow up. I'm talking about 2 or 3 years ago. So the academy kids were already in the army, some of the academy kids from then. And seeing them in the army and talking to them about the army service, guys like Galen, who really had no connection to his Judaism, is all of a sudden here, Israel, happy to be Jewish, going out there, talking to synagogues, being invited to synagogues and everything. Something similar happened to Ike Davis when he came to New York, by the way. Ike Davis was also never really involved with his Judaism. All of a sudden he comes to New York. Everybody knows he's Jewish. So he's there. He's invited to all kinds of bar mitzvahs and everything. So he gets connected to his Judaism. But when he came to Israel, it was a different thing. It was a different story for him. I think you saw that in the movie as well. He just became much more connected to Israel, to what was going on there. He was with us in Arizona. He's retired as a player. I asked him if he wanted to come to be a citizen and everything. He said, I'd love to, but I'm not going to be playing baseball anymore. But he lives in Arizona. He came out to see the team 4 weeks ago to visit with us a couple of days. He was there. He was part of the team. He just feels a part of it now, even though he's not Israeli.
And Ty Kelly is playing with you too.
Ty Kelly is also an interesting story because Ty Kelly, you wouldn't tell from his name I mean, the Cohens and the Solomons and all those, you can find out and figure it out. But a guy like Ty Kelly, he actually came to me because he was playing minor league baseball and he was signing autographs one day. And there were a couple of kids there with Yama Kazan. And he said to them, hey, I'm Jewish also. And they ran running to their dad and they told their dad. And their dad got in touch with me. And I got in touch with Ty. And it turns out Ty's mother's Jewish. So he's actually kosher according to the halacha even. His dad was not Jewish. His dad is Kelly. And he's bought into it. He's studied a lot about Israel, about Judaism. He's really expanded his knowledge of Israel. There were incredible conversations going on in Arizona about Israel, what's happening in Israel with the missile attacks and everything, between the native Israeli kids trying to explain to Ty what it was like living there, what it's like living under missile attacks and everything, and Ty really being very interested in hearing about that whole story and understanding everything.
Yeah, at one point in the documentary, one of the guys had said that they looked at themselves as the Sandy Koufax of our time today, right?
Yes, right, exactly. Well,
is the role models.
Yeah, they actually painted the door of a garage with Sandy Koufax's figure there as graffiti. But no, they were talked about as warriors, as modern day warriors going out and fighting for Israel on the baseball field. And they see themselves as that. They see themselves as role models, real role models for Israeli youth, for Jewish youth growing up in America, and for Israeli youth growing up in Israel, what Israeli sportsmen can do. Today, Israel has a delegation of 90 athletes going to the Olympics, double of what it was in Rio. And just yesterday, there was a meeting with the whole delegation. And you go there and you see these judo guys who are, really built and everything. And then you see these gymnasts who are like so small and tiny. And by the way, one of the gymnasts is the European champion, has the gold medal for the European Championship in the Noe Ashram, and she has a good chance of getting a gold medal in Tokyo. And then you see the Ethiopian runners, the marathon runners, who are also really skinny and everything, but they're all Jewish athletes. And you didn't see the baseball players. And there are also even 4 horses, because Israel now has horse jumping and is sending 4 horses to the Olympics from Europe. They're sending the 4 horses to go there. So it's a very mixed kind of group that's going to be in Tokyo together.
Right. And then in terms of training, you were training out in Arizona, right?
We came together in Arizona. It wasn't really training. It was to be together for 5 days, mostly for the guys to bond together. That was the most important thing, to bond together, to be together. The guys are all playing in their different frameworks. There's some guys who are playing minor league baseball, some guys playing independent league baseball. Everybody's doing something in their framework. Even Kinsler and Danny Valencia are 2 most highly decorated major league players. I believe next week they're going to Long Island to play in Long Island for 2 or 3 weeks in the independent ball with the Ducks before they come to our camp in Pomona, and we're going to have a camp and then a tour of 9 different games, exhibition games, so guys can really come together then and be together.
Just a technical question, Peter. I understand that baseball was dropped from the Olympics in 2012 and 2016. It's obviously on again now. Apparently, it's going to be dropped again in 2024 in Paris, but then on again in 2028 in Los Angeles. And I'm just wondering, why is that the case? Does it have to do with venues?
No. There's the Olympics. What happened now when Thomas Bach took over the Olympics, I believe 6 or 10 or 8 years ago, something like that. They said that there are core sports, okay, track and field, gymnastics, whatever, judo. And then each country can add 5 new sports, 5 different sports that are not part of the core sports. So obviously Japan wanted to put baseball because baseball is the national sport in Japan. It's the biggest sport in Japan. That's also why it's going to be in the United States. And that's why, unfortunately, in Paris, there's going to be breakdancing instead of baseball, because they decided to have breakdancing there. I didn't even know breakdancing was a sport.
Is Israel going to send a breakdancing team?
I have no idea.
Peter's not going to be responsible for that one?
No. I'll take care of the team in 2028 going to the United States.
All right. Just a couple of other points about the Olympics before we move on. So you'll be there for the opening ceremony. What do you think that moment is going to be like when you all walk into the arena?
I really don't know what it's going to be like, because, as I mentioned yesterday, we had a meeting with the whole Olympic delegation. And these are not the Olympic delegation, but the people, the president, everything, have been to many, many Olympics. And they said this will be a different Olympics. First of all, I don't know if there's going to be a crowd. There might not be a crowd. They haven't made that decision yet. They'll make it at the end of June. There's no foreigners allowed. So if a Japanese crowd can be let in, if there's no crowd, it's going to be a very weird kind of ceremony to go in there. Also, only the athletes are marching. Only the athletes march anyway. Coaches and trainers and GMs don't get to march. Although I was invited to march as the one staff person from our delegation, so I'll be there also marching with everybody. Listen, I marched in the Maccabi games a couple of times, so I know what it's like. I mean, Maccabi games is not the Olympics. Certainly, a stadium of 20,000 is not a stadium of 80,000 people. But it's nice to walk into a stadium with your country marching there and everything, and it'll be quite emotional. The same as it is when you stand on the first baselines at a game and you hear Hatikva.
Do you know who's going to be carrying the flag, the Israeli flag? And
no, I have no idea.
Has that been? It has. Maybe it's been decided already, but it just hasn't been announced. We really wish everybody just so much success. I mean, as I said, we're all going to be rooting you on. Just one or two other points.
There's one athlete who's also has a medal, because Uri Sasson in judo has a medal already. Israel has 9 medals in the Olympics. That's it. In all the years, Israel has 9 medals. He has one of those medals, and he'll be competing also now. So I assume it's going to be him, because he's also the biggest guy in the delegation, physically.
So he can carry that flag. I don't think it's too heavy for him, by the way.
No. He's over 100 kilos, so that's.
Gosh. I'm sure he can manage it just fine. Just a couple other bases. I just want to go back to the work that JNF is doing in Israel. What's the timeline for getting those fields up and running?
We've been trying to raise money for these fields for the last 10 years. I have personally, and also other people from the JNF. So it's been a difficult road. The JNF gave us $1 million for the first phase of the Beit Shemesh field from the money that we've raised. We also gave another $100,000 the IAB to Beit Shemesh from our winnings from the WBC, because we got winnings from the WBC as a federation. So we said $100,000 of that is going towards the field. So $1.1 million. They started work about 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. And hopefully by after the summer, probably in September or October, phase 1 will be completed, which is basically flattening the area, because it was a very hilly kind of area. It was a real valley. So they've got to flatten the whole area, put a fence around it. It's phase 1 and to put in infrastructure for lights. But that's basically all that phase 1 will be. Maybe some benches for dugouts. We're looking at phase 2 and 3 now to really put in the lights, to put in the rest of the baseball stuff that has to be in there, bullpens and things like that. Scoreboard, stands for some fans, and probably not more than like 1,000 people, and maybe a couple of caravans for clubhouses and offices and things like that. So that's at a later stage. So
it really is catching on.
Yes, it's. Listen, the Corona set us back a little bit, as it set everybody back a little bit. I mean, there was basically no clubs or situations going on for the last year. So again, it's hard to see where we're standing right now. We do have 5 teams in the adult league, where before we only had 3 or 4. So there is more activity there. And I'm telling you, once we have the 2 teams, the two fields, because as they say, if you build it, they will come. So the 2 fields are there. The Olympics are there. The coverage in the Olympics and the excitement about the Olympics. I mean, the 2 games we're having are the first 2 games are on Thursday and Friday at 1:00 in the afternoon in Israel. So perfect timing. It's great for Friday at 1:00 in the afternoon. Couldn't be better. And hopefully we win. So then people will be very excited about it, and hopefully we get a medal, so even more excited. So I think those 2 things coming together, we could have 2,000 and 2,500 players in the next coming 2 years or so. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, there's a lot of growth there, really. I think it's all very exciting. And again, as I saw in the documentary, and I know anecdotally also, you have so many Israeli kids that are just so excited about playing baseball and really look up to these players. And they're heroes. And so really the growth is just, it's there. I'm just really curious, Peter, just to take a really big step back, another one. When did you first start getting interested in baseball, and why did it captivate you so much from the get-go?
I'll answer that question in a second. I just want to mention one other thing, that in 2 weeks, we're sending our U18 team, our under 18 team, to the European Championship. 2 years ago, they were in the B pool and they won the B pool. So now they're going up to the A pool. And those are all kids who grew up in the program. Those are kids who were born in Israel, raised in Israel. One kid came when he was, 15 or 16 years old, but all the rest have played here their whole times, and they were in the academy as well. So that's one great thing that we were doing. You can see that the young people are coming up and playing good baseball, high levels of baseball. And also we're going to the European Championship as an adult team right after the Olympics. In September, we have the European Championship. But to what you asked me, I always tell the story. My parents are from Europe, and they came to America, and I was born in America in New York. But a lot of my family also came to Israel. My father actually worked for the Jewish agency in Italy and sent his mother and his sisters and my mother's father to Israel. He sent them all to Israel, but they decided to go to the Promised Land, so they went to America. And I was born in America. And at the age of 10, in 1967, 2 weeks after the Six-Day War, we came to Israel. We flew to Israel on the first nonstop El Al flight. We were in Israel for the summer for 2 months, just after the war. Incredible euphoria in Israel. He took the whole family to visit Jerusalem, to visit Bethlehem, to visit Hebron. It was just all these newly places that were brand new for Israel to see and to experience. And even the Arab population there was very excited about having tourists and having money coming in and everything. So that was the first thing that dictated where I am today. And the second thing, 2 years later in 1969, the Miracle Mets won the World Series. So that was my baseball indoctrination. So therefore, today I'm living in Israel and for 32 years already and running baseball basically in Israel.
And you play?
I never played baseball. I played softball. I never played baseball. And growing up in New York and Manhattan, there was no baseball as a kid.
What position did you play?
I was a catcher in softball.
Pretty good?
No.
That's why Peter manages today, right?
Exactly. When you can't play, you manage.
I think something like that. But listen, Peter, you've done mighty well for yourself managing, because clearly, you've put together this team that's making it to the Olympics right now. So that's really quite an accomplishment. And we're going to leave it right there. I know you've got a crazy schedule, speaking to so many others. So really, we just wish you and the entire team every success. If you hear some cheering going on from the direction of the United States, it's going to be all of us here just rooting you all on. So we really just, once again, wish you much success. And we just want to thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of IsraelCast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all the support coming from all the Jewish population around the world. You are the 25th player. We're 24 players going to the Olympics, and the Jewish world is the 25th player. Thank you.
I like that. All right, we'll have info about Peter and Team Israel on the show notes page of our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. And as a reminder, we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. And just so you never miss an episode, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Simply search for IsraelCast. And while you're at it, don't forget to rate and review us to make it easier for more folks around the world to find us. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. Once again, it's jnf.org/IsraelCast. Now, it takes a whole moshav to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Alicia Yaffe, Dara Shapiro, and Kevin Solka. Our editors are Jay Rothman, Roman Molino-Dunn, and Jake McGuire from Miratone Studios in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top and tail of the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. Now, IsraelCast is indeed powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more information about JNF USA, visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say howdy, we'd all love to hear from you. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Stephen Shalowitz, thanking you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.